20th century in this lecture. The 20th century, 1900. We call it the modern age of English poetry. And usually the period, the modern age of English poetry, is from 1900 to 1965. A total breakaway from the Victorian age. No more rules to govern us. No formalism. Constantly moving towards freedom and growth of tolerance and the stream of consciousness and imagery and symbolism and surrealism. It is in this age that we are looking at the poetry of T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot, 1888 to 1965. He won the Nobel Prize in 1948, and his best known poem is certainly The Wasteland. He is known for his serious poems. He was affected by the World War, as were many other thinkers of the period. He was a poet, essayist, playwright, critic, and much more. But the poem that we are going to look at today is called The Naming of Cats, and it is from his collection called Old Possum's Book of Poems. Isn't that interesting? T.S. Eliot writing The Wasteland and talking to us about cats. Let's see what he has to do in this poem. The Naming of Cats. It's a slightly long poem, so let me read it to you in parts and explain it. The naming of cats is a difficult matter. It isn't just one of your holiday games. You may think at first I'm as mad as a hatter when I tell you a cat must have 3 different names. And what kinds of names is he talking about, T.S. Eliot, in this poem? Let me read on. First of all, there's the name that the family use daily, such as Peter, Augustus, Alonzo, or James, such as Victor, or Jonathan, George, or Bill Bailey. All of them sensible, everyday names. I want you to remember that he's a British poet. So he's talking about names which are probably common in Great Britain. You can shift it to the Indian scene and think of what names you might have for your cats. And then he goes on. There are fancier names if you think they sound sweeter. Some for the gentlemen, some for the dames, such as Plato, Admetus, Electra, Demeter. But all of them sensible, everyday names. But I tell you, a cat needs a name that's particular, a name that's peculiar and more dignified. Else, how can he keep up his tail perpendicular, or spread his whiskers, or cherish or names of that kind? I can give you a quorum, such as Munkustrap, Coaxo, or Coricopat, such as Bombalurunia, or Els Geliroma. I know, don't they sound odd? But that's exactly what Eliot is doing here. He began with names that you're probably familiar with, and then he moved on to names which we've never heard of, right? He's already talked about being as mad as a hatter, and that's exactly what he is here when he tries to give the cat its name. They could be a female cat or a male cat, but what does he call them? He says for the gentlemen and the dames. So he's bringing in a kind of seriousness even in the naming of the cats. Then we go on. But above all, the third one we are talking about. But above and beyond, there's still one name left over. And that is the name that you never guess. The name that no human research can discover, but the cat himself knows and will never confess. When you notice a cat in profound meditation, the reason I tell you is always the same. But before I read the concluding lines, let me try and explain what he's saying here. A cat has a name which it only knows. Nobody else knows that name. Seemingly a simple poem, but Eliot could not write a simple poem, my dear friends. So what is it about? The first is the name, the way people see you. What do they see you as? Peter, Augustus, James, Victor, etc. And then the second one is the persona that you put on. All of us have a mask, he says. We pretend to be what we are not. That is the second name. And the third name, which is very important whether we admit it to or not, is what you truly are. Okay? So that is why a cat has 3 names. Probably every human being also has 3. So when a cat is deep in meditation, the reason I tell you is always the same. And the poem concludes, his mind is engaged in a rapt contemplation of the thought of the thought of the thought of his name, his ineffable, effable. Right? Look at that. What is he doing? He's probably confusing us of the thought of the thought of the thought of his name. Read that again. Listen to it again, and probably it will be clearer what we really are. Do we know that? Let me leave you with that question and invite you to read the poem again. The poem is probably in a light mood, but as I told you, it does hide a very, very serious meaning. It was actually collected from letters that he wrote to his granddaughter, and therefore the light tone. But when I look at the figures of speech, I can't but draw your attention to allusions, right? So you have in the first verse, mad as a hatter. Do you remember your Alice in Wonderland? Do you remember how Alice went down the rabbit hole? That's what he is referring to here. The poem is full of similes and metaphors. Again, a very, very common figure of speech. So we need to look for them, understand them, and try to see what purpose they serve in the particular poem. He uses repetition of phrases like such as again and again, because he wants to draw attention that he's making comparisons here. And therefore, you would notice such as Victor, such as Plato. Each time he gives us a list of names, he uses that. Of course, there is personification. Remember, when a non-human thing, a non-human creature maybe, like the cat here, is being given human qualities, human features, so there is personification. Remember the cat in deep meditation at the end of the poem? So obviously, he's giving the cat human qualities. So the poem is filled with figures of speech. Read it again, and I'm sure they will become clear to you. That was an interesting poem, wasn't it? Cats, dogs, rabbits, deer, what have you? There have been poets writing about all these animals and birds. Don't forget the cuckoo and the nightingale and the dove and many more. So go back home, look at some of the poems on cats maybe to begin with. One of my favorite is Edward Lear's The Owl and the Pussy Cat. You know, they went for a ride. Do read that poem and many more.